And the power that is centralized in his hand is remarkable. And it's so amazing to watch how when repression and tyranny and authoritarianism is exercised for the benefit of one political group, the blind reverence that group will then have for that person is unlimited. As you probably know, we've reported many times on the, I would say, incomparably repressive censorship regime that Brazil has implemented in the last 2 years. And it was all implemented not by Congress. Congress never voted for this power. They tried to get Congress to give the courts the power to censor the internet in the name of combating fake news and disinformation, all the usual rationale for allowing governments to censor dissent online, but the Congress failed to implement it. And so the Supreme Court just said, I don't care, we're going to do it anyway. And they just invented powers that allowed them to censor the internet. And they were said at the time, don't worry, this is only for the election, the 2022 election. We have to guard against fake news for the upcoming 2022 election, where Jair Bolsonaro, who the Brazilian establishment hates, was trying to be reelected against Lula da Silva, who in the past the Brazilian establishment has also hated, but in this case, they let him out of jail as a result, in part of our reporting, in 2019, because they knew that he was the only person who could beat Bolsonaro, which he did by a very small margin in 2022. And the Supreme Court used these censorship powers all throughout that election to censor pretty much anything derogatory being said about Lula. You weren't allowed to call him a thief, even though he had previously been convicted of corruption, a conviction that was nullified. But you're allowed to say, oh, I think there's evidence that this politician stole. Pretty much anything that you wanted to say about Lula, the Supreme Court would intervene and say, we demand this be removed from the internet. They would force public social media platforms to block some of the most largest and influential social media accounts, including members of Congress who were supporting Bolsonaro. It was just a massive censorship scheme. And they said, oh, but don't worry, the minute the election is over, the day after the election is over, this power is going to disappear. And yet it didn't. It's continuing to this very day. We've reported on how the secret orders function. This one judge, Alexandre de Moraes on the Supreme Court, he'll send an order to Twitter and Facebook and Google and TikTok and Telegram and Rumble. And he'll say, you are hereby required within the next 48 hours, within the next 2 hours, he gives them 2 hours, to ban all accounts of the following people. And he says, this order is secret and you're required to keep it a secret. We were able to get a hold of one of these secret orders in the beginning of 2023. We reported on the show. It was unbelievable. It just had lists and lists of people who are required to be banned. None of them were charged with any crimes. None of them were notified even of the issuance of this order. None of them had any due process to contest it. We reported all of that. He has imprisoned a lot of Bolsonaro's associates. In fact, we just did a major story where his top foreign policy advisor, Felipe Martins is his name, was part of an investigation, but has never been charged with any crime, let alone convicted of one. And Alexandre de Moraes ordered him imprisoned in March of this year, before any trial, before any indictment or accusation. And his argument for why he was ordering him in prison preventatively before trial was based on a complete falsehood. Namely, a reporter very friendly to the court falsely claimed that Felipe Martins had left Brazil on a presidential plane with Bolsonaro and never came back. There was records of him entering the U.S., but no records of him leaving the U.S. and re-entering Brazil. And therefore, that proved that he somehow evaporated, and that proved that he was a flight risk. And he was in prison in a very harsh prison condition for more than 6 months. And we wrote an article about it about 2 weeks ago detailing there was a mountain of evidence showing that Felipe Martins never left Brazil, that he wasn't on the presidential plane, that he was in Brazil the entire time, to the point where even the prosecutor asked for his release. And this judge kept him in prison based on nothing, unjustly. And then he finally got out of jail last week. And these are the kinds of abuses that have been taking place repeatedly, all in the hands of this one judge. So about a month ago or so, or maybe a little bit longer than that, we were able to obtain a gigantic archive of messages, audios, documents, texts, all kinds of conversations that came right from the heart of the chambers of this judge. Basically, in order to serve as judge and at the same time investigator, the charge of the police. So he would instruct the police arms of the court to go and investigate, and he would tell these police arms, don't make it look like I'm the one who asked for this investigation, or I'm the one who said that these people should be investigated. You write a report saying they should be investigated and then give it to me, so it makes it seem as though I'm not the one initiating this. I'm the one just receiving passively these requests from some other organ. And they talked about how it was designed to create this pretext, this appearance of propriety. These are just the first stories. And there's all sorts of other parts of these stories already about how inside his chambers, they were kind of telling these dark jokes about how disturbing this all was. Sometimes they would say, go and find crimes that this news site is doing, and the guy would come back and say, I couldn't find anything, and then they would say, look, he wants evidence of criminality, be creative. It's only at the beginning. We're going to continue to do this reporting. And today, which is day 2, basically we started the reporting yesterday, this judge went to the Supreme Court and defended himself, and not only did he say, of course, I've done nothing wrong, absolutely everything I did was totally justifiable, he also said, this is the sort of fake news and dangerous disinformation that is an attack on this court's legitimacy and therefore an attack on Brazilian democracy. Basically using the language that he always uses whenever he wants to criminalize criticism of him, whenever he wants to turn dissent into a crime. He says, no, that's not dissent, that's an attack on me and the court and an attack on Brazilian democracy, and that's against the law. And of course, he first calls it disinformation. Any criticism of him he regards as false. He calls it disinformation. And then, as today, he starts strongly implying that it's criminal, although oftentimes, overtly, he'll say it's a crime. Obviously, it's going to be harder when I'm working with the largest newspaper in Brazil, sort of the New York Times of Brazil, to prosecute the reporting and criminalize it, but he made very clear today that's how he sees it and would like to. And as I always say when I talk about Brazil and this judge, it's not just that Brazil is a very influential country in the hemisphere, the second largest country in the hemisphere after the United States, the country with major oil reserves and geostrategic importance and the most important environmental asset on the planet, which is the Amazon. It's also that Brazil is still part of the democratic world, and what it does really influences other countries. And I also think it's very important to see the kind of quickness and ease with which true repression can take hold. Kind of go from something that is authoritarian, but you still feel like you can fight it, to increasing levels of intensity where even the attempt to fight it becomes criminal. And the major reason that this is happening is because the Brazilian left, which 6 years ago when Alexandre de Moraes was being appointed to the Supreme Court by a sort of centrist president who took over when Dilma Rousseff, the successor to Lula, was impeached, and they considered that a coup government, an illegitimate coup government. The president, Michel Temer, who helped overthrow Dilma Rousseff, when he appointed Alexandre de Moraes, the entire left united and said he is a grave threat to democracy. They called him a racist, a fascist, a white supremacist, a coup monger. The entire left was united against him. And so once Alexandre de Moraes was the enemy of the left called him all the names they always call everybody they dislike, including fascist and racist. Once he got onto the court and Bolsonaro was president, he began censoring the political enemies of the left. He began criminally investigating them. He drove many of them into exile. Many of them are hiding in the United States or elsewhere for very valid fear of imprisonment. And some of them are in prison, oftentimes for criticizing him, for speaking harshly of him, or the court for questioning the integrity of the election in a way that he alone has decreed criminal. And the power that is centralized in his hand is remarkable. And the reason it happens is because he's only basically exercising these repressive powers against the political enemies of the left. And it's so amazing to watch how when repression and tyranny and authoritarianism is exercised for the benefit of one political group, the blind reverence that group will then have for that person is unlimited. Not only do they defend every single thing that Alexandre de Moraes does, they don't care if it's criminal, they don't care if it's an abuse of the Constitution, they don't care at all. They don't care if it's based on falsehoods, like that case I explained where they imprisoned Bolsonaro's top foreign policy advisor. They'll defend every single thing he does, and more than that, they believe that any reporting on him, any questioning of him, any criticism of him is criminal, is like treason. It's like an attack on Brazilian democracy, and he believes that too. So we'll see this where this reporting goes. This is obviously not the first time I've done reporting based on major leaks, but each one brings certain, I think, crucial journalistic benefits and benefits to democracy. But obviously, if you are doing this sort of thing against powerful factions, there's also risks that come with it. And it's always a question of where this will go. But at the end of the day, this is reporting that obviously has to be done and should be done. It sheds a lot of light on what he's doing. There's no national security issues involved in it. He believes he is Brazilian democracy itself, and any questioning of him or speaking at all critically of him is an attack, by definition, a criminal attack on the legitimacy of the state and therefore democracy itself. It is very illuminating about how that could so easily happen elsewhere, including places where you think it can't. So we will definitely keep you updated on the reporting as it goes along. I'm sure there'll be lots of twists and turns to come. There's a lot more reporting to do. We've only just begun, so we will keep you filled in as everything progresses.